Delighted to welcome in the studio Ed Rennie, who's the founder and co-director of Climate Debate UK. Ed, a very good morning. Thanks for being with me in the studio. And if any of you got any questions about climate change, about the climate crisis that some people would like us to believe, then please give us a call and Ed can hopefully try and help answer those questions. 0344 499 1000. Ed's with me for the next 15 minutes or so, and we will take some of your calls. So, Ed, you started up this new do I call it a think tank, Climate Debate? What's it all about, and what are you trying to, how are you trying to help sort of educate and inform the debate?
Okay, so me and my co-founder colleague Ben Pyle, we founded this, essentially, to begin with, it's a website, but we're hoping to expand. But principally, it's to explain the climate debate so that everyone can understand what's involved. And of course, most of all, that there is a debate to be had about the science, and that sometimes will occur between the scientists, and already does, although that's not well publicised. But of course, the most important thing is about policy, because what it turns out is if you look at the observable evidence, there is no actionable evidence of a climate crisis or a climate emergency. That doesn't mean climate change is not a problem, or that it isn't happening or anything like that. What it means is that if you look at hurricane storms, heat waves, precipitation, all of these effects, there are noticeable changes, but generally speaking, there is nothing in the evidence to suggest that we are in an emergency or a crisis. And this means that we need to look very clearly at policy, because we're not pursuing the correct policies. And even if you believe that we should bring in net zero in 2050, we need to actually be using hydrocarbons now. So oil, coal, gas, and obviously producing more nuclear, and then then it develops further.
So the issue of global warming is not in doubt, albeit some of the data shows that in a sense it's flattening out over the last decade or so, depending on which data you use, but that seems to be what's happening. But then the question is, what's the consequences of that warming relative to everything else that's going on, and whether one should worry about that, and does that mean that there's a crisis?
The problem is that there's been exaggerations of the effects of global warming and the evidence of climate change. So these get exaggerated. That feeds a sense of alarmism and urgency, which means that policies are pursued kind of at breakneck speed, which don't make any sense. So, for example, net zero got brought forward from 2050 to 2030. That makes a huge difference.
But our net zero, we're still targeting 2050.
In law, it's 2050, but the government has set targets for 2030. So, for example, this is why they want to get rid of gas boilers by 2030. They want to get rid of selling fully petrol cars by 2030. And also, one of the reasons they're not pursuing fracking. So it was one of the great things that was coming out of the Conservative leadership debate was that they were going to start looking at fracking again.
Including Rishi Sunak, and then it was the first decision that he U-turned on when he got into office.
Yes.
So, you've got policy decisions being essentially sort of rushed.
Yes.
Even though, as I talked about in my Sunday sermon, actually, in a sense, we're in serious danger of cutting our nose off to spite our face, because we're making our energy so expensive that it's making business uncompetitive, and it's increasing the energy bills and therefore other bills and food bills for ordinary British citizens living up and down the country.
Yes, so alongside lockdown and quantitative easing, a major cause of upping our energy prices and then that factoring into inflation is actually the policies associated with net zero. It has meant that people aren't investing in North Sea oil, they're not investing in hydrocarbons. They're not we should be really a net exporter of these things, and that affects our deficit, and that affects our overall economy.
Which we used to be. We were a net exporter of energy in the 80s and 90s. So, OK, we've got your basic thesis that, yes, there's warming, but it's not a crisis. Let's go to Milton Keynes and see or hear what Richard has got a question for us. Richard, a very good morning. Thanks for ringing in. What's on your mind? Have you got a question for us?
I have indeed. Good morning to you, Richard. Last week you had my wife on, Laura, and this week you've got me, because we listen to you avidly.
Great. So it's a genuine family show then for you.
Oh, it is. We enjoy your programme very much indeed. So there you go, feather in your cap.
Thank you. What's your question for Ed?
Right. Basically, the data that we have doesn't go back far enough historically to say anything about climate change, etc., because we've only been doing data for a couple of 100 years, and that data is not very good. If you look back at the 12th, 13th century, we had totally different climate. Weather was awful. People were dying. Okay, I know technically they haven't got the same things, but they were still talking about weather. Now, we are politically driven by this, how can I say, spurious argument about climate, and I think is politically motivated to drive things in a direction, like it is with everything else we've done, back from decimalisation and so on and so forth. So, you know, I cannot believe in... Sorry.
And have you got a question for Ed on that? I mean, I suppose the question that comes out of what you've just said is, well, why do you think that that our politicians, along with many other global leaders, are doing this?
It's, again, probably to do with finance, to get more revenue to whatever, for whatever reason, because they are basically, how can I say, trying to push things in which don't need to be put there. I mean, it's very frustrating.
It is frustrating. Well, let's go to Ed and just say, why do you think that you've got, Ed, many global leaders pushing hard down the net zero route, despite the fact that some of the biggest consumers, like the Chinas, the Indonesias, the Indias of this world, are clearly going to keep on using coal on an increasing rate that's going to render all the other efforts completely irrelevant?
Well, what you have often in politics is ideology taking over. And the reality is that ideology stems from essentially a good starting point, which is that we should protect the environment and you know, be conservationist about nature and its beauty and everything else.
We all agree with that.
We have a strong conservationist tradition in this country, very much so. But that gets twisted into, well, we've got to pursue this relentlessly to the damage of our own economy. So it's very clear, for example, that the human effects, the social economic impacts of our policies to mitigate a climate crisis that is largely unevidenced are actually having a worse effect on the socio-economic effects of our people. Now, they're pursuing this because it's, I mean, I don't want to use the term virtue signalling, but it is a way that I've worked in Parliament before. I've seen what happens. Politicians get captured by an ideology, and it's kind of this self-depreciating cycle. Where
let's be honest, it is virtue signalling.
Yes, yes.
Right.
I mean, but there's more to it than that. But that is a lot of what's driving it.
That's what.
And it's what happened when you had David Cameron and David Miliband, you know, quite a few years back. That's when this competition really began in earnest between the two main parties in particular, who can show that they're most green.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Richard, thank you so much for calling from Milton Keynes. Don has just messaged in. The caller mentioned hundreds of years in terms of climate measurement. We should be looking at millions of years. Well, actually, and of course, that is all geological data and computer modelling, isn't it?
I think there's a problem here, which is that because, as the previous caller mentioned, there is an issue with the data going earlier into history is less reliable than we have now. Obviously, you don't have any satellite data from before we had satellites, and satellites is generally the most accurate. And what you see, I mean, a classic example, but we can see very clearly, is the number of people that die due to extreme weather events has decreased 100-fold in the last 100 years.
Yes.
So in 1920, the number of people who were killed by extreme weather events peaked. And ever since then, it's been falling, and it fell pretty rapidly after 1920, and is still falling and is still going down, even though we've had massive population increases since then.
Which is great news, and we should celebrate, and that's in a sense because we've adapted and we've learnt how to reduce risk from weather events.
Yes, and we've been able to do so because of economic growth, and that economic growth has been provided by industry, which is obviously provided by a proper energy market, which includes hydrocarbons.
And indeed our own technology. Stay there, Ed, because we're going to head up to Fife in Dunfermline, where Mick is on the line. Hello, Mick. Good morning to you.
Hello there.
How are you? What's on your mind? You've got a question for Ed.
Yeah, in so much as a quick monologue. We have the Greens. We have about 12, 13 Greens in the UK, MPs in the UK, and they seem to wield a great amount of power.
Yeah, hang on a minute. You might have 12 or 13 in Scotland. We've got one MP in Westminster. How many have you got? How many MSPs have you got?
In all the countries, UK countries.
Right, okay.
It's about 13. However, I won't hold a gun to your head as far as that one's concerned. However, they remind me of a certain party in the 30s in Germany where they drip fed the population into their way of thinking. Now, we strip fed the major parties plus the police.
Yeah.
We get these MPs coming on who always touch on the green effect. And regarding the police, on that M25 fiasco, if they had been teenagers that were on that gantry, they would have been off yesterday. Now, apparently, there's a billionairess in America who subsidises the Greens. I take it, if that's the case, she has shares in wind farms.
Well, who knows? Who knows me? I mean, the reality is...
The matter is, we need to replace all the trees that have been chopped down in the world, because without green, we're going to die.
Hang on, Mick. Hang on. We don't want to chop down all the trees in the world. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that seems to be the way it's going. I mean, the Brazilian rainforest, they've been chopping that down.
Yeah, that's a separate issue. But, Mick,
No, I think it's all of one.
Well, hang on, Mick. Let's just be clear. I mean...
The trees, they suck up CO2.
That's right. No, trees are a good thing. That's why we should be planting more of them, and that's why we shouldn't, for example, be getting the biomass pellets from chopping down trees in North America. Just to clarify, absolutely, that we're not comparing the Greens to a party in Germany before the Second World War. But thank you for calling, Mick. Lots and lots of other messages coming in. One here which is from Nicholas, who said the climate debate is the new Strangelove. Anyway, let's go to Yorkshire, where Janet is on the line. Hi, Janet.
Hello.
Hi. What's on your mind this morning?
Yes, it's just I live in fear of 2030, which is basically to me a doomsday date. I'm a pensioner, and basically I'm just hoping that I don't live long enough for 2030, because the fear of somebody coming in my home, ripping my boiler out and taking my car off me with no funds to replace either. I just don't see any future for an old person.
Well, Janet, I would like you to live way beyond 2030, and I would like us to successfully campaign to stop the madness so that no one's going to try and persuade you to do that, because you, like many others, can't afford it.
Well, that's the problem. These men in power they're okay. They've got plenty of money to do it, and they just don't think of the economics for the everyday person.
It's absolutely right. Janet, great call. And I think a lot of people like you, Janet, are very afraid of the consequences, and that's why we've got a campaign. We want common sense. And yes, we all want to protect the environment. We all want cleaner air, but we've got to do it in a smart, strategic, and most importantly, an affordable way. And there's no point making ourselves completely poorer and colder and hungrier because we can't afford it, when it makes absolutely zero difference on a global basis. We've just got time before the break to go to Surrey, where Charles is on the line, who's got a question for Ed. Good morning, Charles.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I've got one question, and this one gets the climate change fanatics. It makes them mad and accuses you of being everything. What is the experiment or experiments that were performed to conclusively prove the link between climate change and man-made activity? We've got models all over the place, but models can be changed, and we know how effective models are. That's all. I cannot get anyone to answer that
Well,
question.
let's see if Ed can help us, Charles.
There's two really important points. One is what's called climate feedbacks. Now, a lot of the alarmist narrative is very much dependent on these feedbacks all being negative. But of course, we know one of the feedbacks is positive, which is increased carbon dioxide means increased greening. And a recent NASA study has shown this. The other point that was very important from Charles there is about modelling, because again, the models that have been used around climate, they don't agree with each other. And also, every time they've made their predictions and then we've observed the reality of warming, warming has been very much at the lower end of those predictions. And modelling, again, it's what you put in. If you put in this amount of global warming, then you're going to expect this amount of climate change. And so the alarmism feeds the alarmism. It's like a kind of cycle of things getting more and more concerning. But it's not actually confirmed by the observable data once the observable data reaches. And this has been going on since the 1970s, in fact. Always these predictions have been, it's going to be in 10 years' time, it's going to be in 20 years' time. We reach that date, and particularly in terms of any kind of extreme weather or extreme climate change, it has not materialised. These predictions have never proved correct.
Charles, great question. We've just got time to go from Surrey to Leicester, where John is on the line. Morning, John. Have you got a question for Ed?
Oh, good morning, yeah. Basically, this climate change is just total insanity. At the end of the day, there's no real proof, like that chap's been saying, and what it's all connected to is all these globalists, Rishi Sunak and co. That's where the biggest problem lies. All these globalists just using this climate change to ramp up the price of everything.
But John, they're our global leaders. They're democratically elected. They're highly intelligent. They're thinking of the best for us, the citizens, surely.
No, that's total nonsense. There's no democracy anymore because they're all unelected people. And that's where the problem is.
Hang on, John. I'm going to go to Ed to comment.
There's a very important point to draw out from this, which is the lack of democracy, the democratic deficit. What you've got with a lot of these people who are kind of behind the scenes, they are working to, for example, they think in order to get the changes that we need to avoid this climate crisis, which we have very little evidence of, they need to see behavioural change. It's almost something they think 60% or 2/3 of being able to achieve what they want us to achieve has to be done with behavioural change. And that process has become completely undemocratic. The ULEZ zones and a lot of the stuff you've been talking about today and in recent weeks plays into that. That's an outplaying of them wanting to get us to change our behaviour, whether it be gas boilers and our use of cars.
But the simple answer is why?
This happens with our politics. I've seen it happen several times, is that observable fact and reason, argument, debate ceases to happen because an ideological perspective becomes dominant. And you can see that throughout history in more and less extreme forms. And it becomes kind of utopian. As I say, it takes a good principle, and what drives it is that we should protect the environment. It's a good thing. The natural environment is the source of our food and plantation. Never mind psychologically. It's good to visit the countryside. There are lots of studies showing we need that kind of relationship. But you take something good, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Absolutely.
And
well,
let's see this throughout history.
Let's go to Chelmsford. I think I've got Sue on the line. Hello, Sue.
Hello, Richard, and hello, Ed. I think you're doing a great job, both of you.
Thank you.
Trying to highlight all of this. I think it's absolutely excellent. I'm going to look up your website after the show. My problem with your opinion that it's based on ideology, it's so insane what they're doing. I cannot believe that is the only explanation. As Charles said, you look for something, sane there. Is it the money? Is it what is it? I mean, protecting the environment, mining for all these rare earth metals and minerals is not protecting any environment. It's worse than coal mining, of that.
It's such a good point, Sue. Let's just ask Ed, just quickly before we go to the break. Sue, great question.
Sue's exactly right. And one of the key answers is the lack of democratic accountability. So when you've got this competition that started from 2010 and perhaps even earlier, you've got the two main parties having a complete consensus that this is what we need to do. So there is no real choice when you're choosing the government to say, actually, we don't want that. And the same thing happened with the EU, and it's happened with other things as well, where this democratic accountability doesn't apply. It doesn't. The point of democracy is to put the wind up our democratically elected politicians, and they don't feel that yet.
Sue, great question. Thank you very much. Just finally, Ed, quickly, how much, though, is it the money?
There's a lot to do with the money, and there's a lot to do with these philanthropic organisations that are behind the scenes and that fund a lot of this. We get into that on the website, climatedebate.co.uk. Everyone can. We will be growing the website. There'll be more to read, but
Fantastic.
There's a lot there already.
Ed Rennie, founder of Climate Debate, thank you so much for coming in, for answering those questions, putting forward your views. Lots of thoughts supporting Ed in that. Don't go anywhere, because after the break, folks, we're going to be with Zoe Clues, the founder of Zoe Clues Associates, talking about lockdown lessons, and lots of other messages coming in. One here from Tim says, Richard, the net result of net zero will be the export of Western industrial wealth to the East and won't affect the climate at all. It's Tice Talk.